This is Globalization Part 2 Review and page 2. Okay, so in the 1930s, our road to war, which I'm going to review here. Some of you did an essay basically on this topic. So I've got the information written down. You might just want to do some definitions if you feel like you need to. So our first real shift in policy, again, throughout most of the 1920s, 1930s, we stay isolationists. We don't want to get involved in war. Then we go through the Great Depression, so we're kind of preoccupied with ourselves. Very first shift in policy is when Japan invaded not Manchuria, but the main part of China, and that's in 1937. And our reaction was to send aid to China. Even though many people argued this violated the Neutrality Acts we'd already established in the 1930s. But FDR tried to say that it wasn't a war. Japan invading China, they weren't actually at war, so we could give this aid to China.
Wait, what was the quarantine speech?
Quarantine speech was basically said we have to quarantine the aggressors, and he also talked about the 4 freedoms in there that we need to work to preserve in the world. It was basically a justification for why he felt like we needed to give some aid to China.
What president was this under?
FDR, because he's president from 1932 through the rest of the war. All right. World War II began after Germany invaded Poland. Okay, remember Britain and France were trying to appease Hitler. They gave him Sudetenland in the Munich Pact. Then he just took more. After the invasion of Poland, we passed the Neutrality Act of 1939, which was the cash and carry policy. Okay. Then in 1940, you're going to see France fall to Germany, which pretty much left Britain to fight Hitler. And so that was when we did the Destroyers for Bases deal, where we exchanged some World War I naval destroyers for military bases. And then after the Battle of Britain, we're going to pass the Lend-Lease Act, which gives more direct aid to the British. And you also might want to add there the Atlantic Charter. That's really where an alliance is made between us and Great Britain.
What year was the Battle of Britain?
That was in September of 1940, I think.
What was the cash and carry?
That is when, like, people could come buy stuff from American business, but they had to transport it themselves and pay cash, so that we didn't have to worry about our ships getting blown up and things like that. All right, Japan invaded Indochina, which caused us to put an embargo on them, and that embargo really hurt them. So they sent people over to negotiate perhaps an end to that embargo, and those negotiations ceased. And they attacked Pearl Harbor. That was December 7th, 1941. And that led to a declaration of war.
When was the fall of France?
Fall of France was in 1940 also. Okay, so you need to be able to trace those events. Okay, many of you did not necessarily do that very well in your World War II essays. Okay. So make sure that you can trace those. All right, now, as far as World War II goes, we talked about the economic impact of it on the economic sheet. So I'm going to talk a little bit about just the 2 fronts of the war and the wartime conferences and so forth. On the European front, again, we're going to wait until 1944 to open up a front in Europe. That's D-Day, June 6, 1944. And we did that because we thought we should start where they're weakest first. So we started down in Africa, then worked our way up through Italy before we opened up the front in France. Which again leaves Stalin feeling very bitter because he was left to fight Hitler's army mostly by himself. On the Pacific front, it's really, we're on our own out there. A vocab word to know would be island hopping. Instead of trying to take back every little island from the Japanese, we took a few strategic ones and then cut off supplies to the rest. And of course, we ended that front of the war with the decision to drop the atomic bomb. in August of 1945 on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There are going to be several wartime conferences where Stalin, Churchill, and Roosevelt get together for the first three, and then Potsdam has some different people at it. At those conferences, they developed the strategy for the war, but the two that are most important to know are Yalta and Potsdam. Yalta is where Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin met, and they started to have disagreements about the future of Eastern Europe after the war and what would happen to Germany. And then Potsdam was Stalin still, but Truman at that point had become president after FDR's death, and Churchill had also been replaced by Attlee, A-T-L-E-E. And that's where they really disagree on the specifics of dividing Germany. So again, the origins of the Cold War lie in World War II because we had very different experiences. What was the Soviet Union's experience during World War II?
A lot of death and destruction.
Very good. Yeah, they have a lot of physical destruction. They have the greatest loss of life. What was our experience during World War II? Anybody? Gage? You're turning around. I know you're ready. Tell me.
No, I don't know.
Well, did we have physical destruction? Not aside from Pearl Harbor. Economically, are we stronger or weaker after the war? We come out of this war stronger. And although this is the second deadliest war in our history, we don't have near the loss of life that the Soviet Union had. So these war experiences cause us to have very different goals after the war. What were the goals of the Soviet Union after World War II?
Take satellite nations to take their natural resources to rebuild their infrastructure.
Very good. Yes. Take satellite nations to rebuild. And what's the other reason they want those countries of Eastern Europe?
Buffer zone.
Very good. To create a buffer zone to protect them from a future attack. Okay. And spread communism. All right. What is our goal after World War II?
To keep from going back into the military. Or wait, never mind.
No, that's right. Yeah, we don't want to go back into another Great Depression. Yeah, we want to economically strengthen ourselves, find new markets for our goods, continue to be the most powerful country in the world economically, the economic powerhouse that we became during World War II. And to do that, we need to make sure there are pro-American leaders around the world, non-communist leaders around the world. So that sends us into the Cold War.
Really quickly,
Uh-huh.
I'm so confused at the difference between Yalta and Potsdam.
Yalta, they're going to really disagree on the future of Eastern Europe. That's when Stalin made all those promises that he's going to let them have free and fair elections, and he breaks all those promises. Potsdam, that's where they really got into the specifics of dividing Germany. They start talking about Germany paying reparations at Yalta. They start talking about dividing Germany, but the specifics of it are all handled at Potsdam. All right. Now, Cold War, there's one word you need to remember. Containment. What's the goal of containment? Stop communism from spreading beyond where it already exists. So part of it was also to accept that Eastern Europe was gone. Don't spend energy and effort trying to get it back. We need to prevent it from spreading anywhere else. So every president since then, through Reagan really, and really the first Bush, that's their goal, is to contain communism. All right, so Truman, some of the ways that he carries out this policy of containment. First off, the focus is going to be on Europe, Western Europe. So the Marshall Plan, the Truman Doctrine, the Berlin Airlift, those are all focused on saving Western Europe from falling behind the Iron Curtain. So what was the Marshall Plan? Nobody remembers? We just covered it. Kira?
Wasn't it promising like aid to any country who didn't want to fall behind?
Very good. Yes, tons of economic aid to Europe. And why did we give all this economic aid to Europe? How did it help our containment policy?
What countries would support us because we have them?
Okay, yeah, they're going to support us because we're giving them the aid. It stabilizes those democracies because look what happened after World War I. We don't do anything to rebuild Europe, and that's what allows the Hitlers and Mussolinis to come to power.
They thought that when there was like less money and economically down, then it was more likely that they'd fall into communism.
Exactly. If we left them economically weak, they'd be more susceptible to communism. It also helps us economically. We send all this money their way. Who are they going to be buying manufactured goods from? Us. So economically, it helps us as well. It helps us accomplish our economic goals. All right, what did Truman pledge in the Truman Doctrine? It related to the situation in Turkey and Greece, where there were communist groups leading uprisings in those countries.
We will support any country militarily if they want to resist communism.
Very good. We're going to support any country trying to resist communism.
Is that just militarily, or is that also?
Economically and militarily. Any way we can. All right. Now, in 1948, then, we have a crisis in West Berlin. Keep in mind, the city of Berlin is entirely in East Germany. East Germany is entirely controlled by the Soviet Union. So our little sector of Berlin, West Berlin, is entirely in Soviet-controlled area. They wanted us out of there. We were a blemish in their buffer zone. So what happened? What did Stalin do to West Berlin, and how did Truman react? Okay, yes, Stalin blockaded the city of West Berlin, cut off electricity to the city. Okay. And Truman responded with the airlift, where we airlifted in supplies for about 11 months until he just lifted the blockade.
How many months?
I think it was about 11. He didn't want to appease Stalin. At the same time, he didn't want World War III. The Berlin airlift led directly to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. As a result of the Berlin airlift, he created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which was our first permanent alliance during peacetime ever. And the whole idea here is it was based on the principle of collective security. There's power in numbers. If the Berlin crisis had become World War III, we want to know we have people behind us who are backing us up. And the more people we have on our side, the less likely the Soviet Union will be to mess with us. And what was the alliance the Soviet Union formed several years later? Warsaw Pact. So I put that there.
What are the years for that?
1948 for the Berlin airlift and 1948 for NATO. Okay, the Korean War there was 1950 to 1953. So this is again Truman. And what got us involved in the Korean War? Lowen?
Containment.
Yeah, containment. North Korea, was communist. And it invaded non-communist South Korea. So basically Truman asked for a UN police action. But most of the UN forces were made up of Americans and South Koreans. And our whole goal was to push North Korea back. Okay. Again, there's never a declaration of war here. And this war is going to be stalemated for about 2 years. And it really cost the Democrats the election of 1952. That's when Eisenhower got elected, promising to wrap up the situation in Korea. Which he does. Okay. Now, what were the results of the Korean War? Did we push back communism? Yes, so we successfully kept South Korea non-communist, but North Korea remained communist.